sim races from around the globe, honoring a revolutionary era of open-wheel racing. With a beast not easily tamed, roaring around legendary circuits at breakneck speed. When engineers and drivers push boundaries, sometimes too far. When heroes muscled roaring beasts wheel to wheel around the hallowed ground. A time when the only driver aids were his 2 feet, the perfect combination of man, machine, and speed. Experience the competition and the glory of early 80s IndyCar action. The Lionheart Retro Series presented by Next Level Racing starts now.
After a net electric start to the season in the Sunshine State, the Lionheart Retro Series makes its way to upstate New York. Once the home of Sage Karam domination, last year saw a thriller after a lap 1 caution. With the field only looking stronger, who can come out on top at the first road course of the season? Welcome to Watkins Glen, and welcome to the Gomez Sim Industries Grand Prix at the Glen, presented by Butt Kicker. Hello everyone, and welcome back to RaceSpotTV and coverage of the 2023 Lionheart Retro Series. The Lionheart Racing Series is powered by HyperX, makers of premier gaming gear like the legendary ultra-comfortable Cloud line of gaming headsets. Whatever you play, however you play, HyperX knows we're all gamers. My name is Arjuna Kankipati, delighted to be joined alongside today by Andrew Kinsella, but let's dive straight into our Butt Kicker pre-race show because boy oh boy, a couple of weeks ago, Andrew, we got a preview into what is going to be a blockbuster 22-round Lionheart Retro Series. Phil Kraus on debut. Well, maybe not unexpected that he'd rise his way to victory lane, but it wasn't easy. Plenty of drivers showed their strength over the course of a wild afternoon at Homestead, Miami.
Absolutely. It was a thrilling race at Homestead Miami Speedway last time out in the Retro Series, but look at that schedule that we have in front of us, presented by Next Level Racing here, Arjuna. We have not only Watkins Glen here today, but New Hampshire, Pocono, and Long Beach, the classic American street circuit coming up in the near future here. This is going to be a packed month of May for these drivers coming up, and I can't wait to see what happens here over the course of these next few weeks.
So what happens when we go from 18 races last year up to 22 this year, and we're going to go all the way into the start of 2023 as well. 3 races in May, 3 in June as well. It's going to be a frenetic summer, that is for sure. The first of our Triple Crowns coming up as well, Andrew, at Pocono. What does that race signify when it comes to the drivers as they look to kick their way on through the first part of this season?
Yeah, that's the race where sort of everybody has it circled on their calendars, where if you're not sort of in a good position by then, you really have to start looking at your season and wondering what's been happening. So Pocono is really that race where you have to focus on just trying to finish and trying to get your way through that race. We've seen the tricky triangle time and time again in the Lionheart Series, Arjuna. It's one race that if you can make your way through the carnage and make your way through all of the action, then you can really set yourself up well for the season to come.
So, again, quick look at the schedule with 1 round complete. We'll take a look at your Next Level Racing driver standings, but they're basically as they finish. Yes, bonus points, shaking things up, of course, a little bit here and there. It's Phil Kraus, Sean Campbell, and then Dan Zegers. 1, 2, 3 rookies. Before then, outside of the rest of the top 10, it is all the established names. The likes of Reagan, Taylor, Graf, Razmas, Guyon, Harden, and Munoz. Still plenty of time to go in this championship. Of course, heading out of Homestead, Miami, 12 months ago, it was a similar situation with Graphics LC, 1, 2, and 3 on the podium. They still lead in the team championship heading out of the Sunshine State, but still looking increasingly tight. And I do get the sense, Andrew, this HyperX team championship is likely going to be the closest it's ever been here in 2023.
Absolutely it is. This field is just stacked with talented drivers, from rookies like Sean Campbell, and it's weird calling Phil Kraus a rookie after what he did in the American Open Wheel Series last year in Lionheart, but he is a rookie here in the Retro Series, and he is definitely meeting the challenge of the likes of Matt Taylor and Mike Rasmus, veterans of the Lionheart Retro Series who really understand this car. So it's going to be very fascinating to watch just how this championship unfolds.
We saw a bit of a split between rookies 1, 2, and 3, and then the rest of your top 10, and that holds here in the Butt Kicker Rookie Championship as well. And I do feel like over the course of these 22 races, it is going to come down to Phil Kraus, Sean Campbell, who can be most consistent over the course of what is going to be a long old championship slog. But watch out for some of those other names, the likes of Kite Bombersback that we've seen across the Lionheart competition, Matt Wagner in our Speedway series, especially over the last couple of years. Bruno Miranda maybe hoping for some more luck in that Junkers Hollinger esports machine. Quick look though through your Gomez Sim Industry Series details as we head into Series 7 of this Lionheart Retro Series. It is the 10th year of the Lionheart Racing Series, as well as we campaign one of the greatest Grand Prix cars of all time, the Lotus 79, but we make it turn left quite a bit more than it maybe thought it should. Everyone's racing with a custom fixed setup designed by the Majors Garage as they fight over their share of cash and prizes that tot up to just over $3,500. Of course, 3 Triple Crown races, Pocono on the horizon. Of course, then a trip to Indianapolis. Auto Club will close out the season as they all try and dethrone Mike Rasmus, your defending series champion. Defending team champions, Madworks Motorsports, of course, still represented in the grid. Going to be interesting to see how they get along. But as we work through our arena event details heading into our first road course race of the year, it's important to note that qualifying has been key. Even though we had 5 lead changes here last year, Matt Taylor, the first driver not to convert pole position to victory lane, he came from second to win the race. But what a remarkable run it was, Andrew, for Sage Karam. 3 years, pole position in each of those races. And across the 3 years, he led all but 1 lap on his way to 3 consecutive victories.
It really was an incredible run for Sage Karam, and this is one of those tracks where there's a lot of action that takes place, but it's really difficult to pass, especially because we don't have that inner loop bus stop section in this retro series. You only have that outer loop, and you don't really have that prime passing opportunity, and maybe that inner loop adds to the Watkins Glen circuit. So you really have to find your way past, and it really tells the message with those most lead changes. We've only had 5 lead changes as the most here in the retro series, so it's going to be difficult to pass the leader, but at the same time, we've seen it happen before, and I think that this race in particular, with the field that we have today, really is primed for some action here.
I think important to note, 5 lead changes technically I think is scored at the end of the lap, so there may be more fighting. That's just the quirk of the iRacing scoring system. Just under 0.2 of a second though last year, the closest margin of victory at this track, and the I think it's 33rd closest finish in series history. It really was a very fun race that Matt Taylor ended up coming out on top in. Here's a look at our track map. Like you mentioned, Andrew, we blast our way past the bus stop chicane, and in some ways, I think drivers may be relieved. This newer layout of Watkins Glen on iRacing has a bit of a treacherous bump there on the entry. However, it means a bit more speed up through the outer loop as then they descend in towards the boots. It's one of those tracks that I think suits this car so well. It's old school in nature, fast, unforgiving, and unrelenting.
Absolutely. This is a throwback track with a throwback car, and there's no better combination here on the iRacing service than that type of racing. You can really throw the car, especially through that boot section, as you mentioned. It's one of my favorites as a driver, just to be able to go through the undulations of the ups and downs of this upper New York State track here. It really is a pleasure to drive, and it's a pleasure to race on, and I just can't wait to see what happens here.
So we're out into qualifying. 7 minutes now left in the session. Drivers started with 10 minutes and 4 flying attempts. And crucially, especially at this layout with the climb up through the yeses, no bus stop, there is no draft help for the drivers either. They've got to figure this out all by themselves. Going to be curious to see how Phil Kraus gets along in his private label Team Hype number 4 as he works his way through that outer loop. And is going to send his way into the boot, but already at times well and truly starting to fly on in. It's Mike Rasmus, your defending champion, that provisionally will grab the pole position with a 1:34.007. Now, interestingly, I always like to look at lap records, Andrew. 92 seconds, so what, a 1:32.929 for Sage Karam back in Season 5. We're what, almost a second and a bit off of that.
Yes, we are, and of course Sage Karam set that on a different tire model for the Lotus 79, and that's something to talk about, is that this is probably the second season really on this newer tire model where they completely redesigned the radial tires on this car, and it changed the top speed and it changed the handling of the car substantially, but it made it much more realistic, much more fun to throw through these corners, and I think that's where you're seeing the difference in timing on these drivers here today. But at the same time, there's still some speed to be had in this car. There's a lot of commitment these drivers have to go through in the course of the lap, and each lap gets faster and faster as this run goes on. So these drivers will be on it right from the green flag all the way through their 4 flying laps.
Interesting to see what Marius Valiokas, our pole position winner last time out, is doing, slip and sliding his way on through. Now, led the most laps heading into the first pit stop cycle. I say led the most laps across of the race, or before the first pit stop cycle, because he forgot that this car doesn't have a pit limiter, Andrew.
Yes, and that's an easy mistake to make in your first road course race or first race in this car, is that it is very old school. You have a brake, you have a throttle, you have a clutch, and you have an H-pattern shifter, and nothing else. And it's one thing that we've gotten used to in many of the modern cars with that pit limiter, but this car does not have it, and you have to be sure that you are getting right down to the very slow pit speed that we have here today, which I believe is 35 miles an hour.
That sounds painful. Plenty of shake-up. Matt Taylor up into second, Siwa Guyon fourth and fifth. But we've been watching this WMP racing duo, Valiokas and Campbell, that I just try to put as much heat into the tire as possible, it seems, before they try and go. They get 4 attempts. They all have a fixed setup as well. They get plenty of fuel that they're trying to burn off, I guess. I understand it. Phil Kraus goes to the top with a 1:33.946. He's electing to just go lap. Which one do you think would be quicker, Andrew?
It's tough to say, Arjuna, really. I like Phil Kraus's approach simply because you do get a lot of temperature in the tires by going at top speed down these long straightaways. That's really what's going to build a lot of the speed, but at the same time, when you have the jerking motions that Campbell and Valiokas have, you do get heat in the tires in a different way. The question is, while they're doing that, will they be burning enough fuel to get the car light enough to really put the car in the optimum window for that 4th lap? Because really what all of these drivers are trying to do is get down to that 4th lap, and that's going to be your fastest lap in these cars because the tires take so long to get in and get into that optimal zone. So it really comes down to not just what they're doing on the 1 lap, but all across their entire 4-lap attempt here.
And what you'll notice is that Matt Taylor backed off about 0.7 of a second on his previous lap to try and set a blistering time on his final lap. David Sirra goes to second on his penultimate attempt. Still waiting for Valiokas and Campbell to set times. Drew White has had an incident in qualifying. Don't think he's going to head out again. Hugo Gallus still trying to get a lap time on the board. Sam Ryman seems to want to start towards the very back. Not surprising, as we had a lap on caution 12 months ago. Phil Kraus on his 3rd attempt in qualifying extends his margin at the front.
And this is not surprising if you watched last year's Lionheart American Open Wheel Series with Phil Kraus. He is so good at qualifying, and it really showed on the road courses for him last year. But Marius Valiokas, you just saw him flash across the screen there in 4th position. He's got 1 more lap here, maybe another one if he can get around in time, but I don't think he can. So it's going to be 1 more lap here for Marius Valiokas. And he's got to really come on here.
O'Brien up to 6th, but Mike Razmas up to 2nd, crucially. Very important, given that, again, the front row has seen the winner come from it in every single previous race so far. Sean Campbell has set a time and has a couple more attempts, but is running out of time on the clock. He's all the way down in 33rd. It's going to be hard to win from there.
It really is. He's got to find another gear here on this final lap. He cannot afford to make a mistake. And the other thing is that when it gets down to it, you have to make sure that you're not making small mistakes, you're not getting any off tracks, not getting any incident points on this lap that could invalidate your lap, and that's where all the pressure is on Sean Campbell. Phil Krause just a little bit wide here through turn 10 and through turn 11. He's coming down. Oh, and he glances off the wall. That's going to invalidate his final flying lap here. That's going to be painful for Phil Krause. Now all he can do here is just watch and wait and see and what happens. Will Rasmus, Sirois, or Valiokas be able to take this over for him?
He actually went faster that lap as well, but it wouldn't have mattered because Marius Valiokas with a 1:33.628 is on top. There are still a couple of contenders, though, that have a chance to split up the order at the front. First up, Michael O'Brien. Oh, that's definitely into the wall. That's a lap time invalidated right there if I have ever seen one. But the man we've been waiting for, can Sean Campbell find his way back to pole position? No, he won't. It will be, though. I was going to say row 2. I was just off. It's row 3 for Sean Campbell.
Valiant attempt there from Sean Campbell, but he falls just short of his teammate. But Valiokas really just stunned the field there with that final lap that he was able to put in there. What a qualifying effort to sit on pole for Valiokas.
Back-to-back poles, and now hopefully no drama on pit lane entry for the WMP racing car of Marius Valiokas. Well, what a intriguing qualifying session it was. We're about 0.3 quicker than the last time we came here for qualifying as well. Shows the evolution of the drivers with a very similar car and a very similar setup. We're ready to go racing though for round 2 of your Lionheart Retro Series. Let's run you down through your starting grid. And so back to back here for pole position for Marius Valiokas. He'll be hoping to convert to victory this time by WMP Racing number 23 alongside with Phil Krause, who tries to make it back-to-back victories. Defending champion Mike Rasmus inside of David Sirois with Sean Campbell alongside with Matt Taylor to round out your front 3 rows. Back in 7th spot, Michael O'Brien has his teammate Chris Fowler for company, David Rodriguez and Tyler Graff in the Nezumi Graphics LC machines complete your top 10. Alex Guyon in 11th as the rookie Sam Fontaine alongside in 12th. 13th sees Christopher Hill. 14th sees George Sandman. It's Kite Bombers back in the Tiger Hawk Simsport car that has Gabe Woods' distinctive white, yellow, and slightly red 04 Team Simrace 24/7 machine. Richie Hearn starts back in 17th along with Dan Zegers, who's got some work to do after finishing on the podium at the end of round number 1. Luke Daniels, Jim Herrick in the 4D Racewear SRT cars make up the rest of your top 20 with Cristobal Valenzuela and then Ricky Harden on row 11. The Candyman, Dustin Wardler, rolls from 23rd with Matt Wagner alongside in 24th. Bruno Miranda and then Andrew Wood, 25th and 26th positions with Chris Reagan and then Chris Stouffer, 27th and 28th. Lanini and Staropoli complete the front 15 rows. Just a handful more drivers staying inside of 2 seconds. That includes Rodrigo Munoz and George Anzaldo making his 100th career start in the series. Paul Jenkins and Joe Hassert, 33rd and 34th. Hugo Gallus and Craig Forsyth, 35th and 36th with Scott Johnson, Sam Ryman and Drew White. 39 cars getting ready to rumble. The biggest field that we've ever seen here at Watkins Glen in 7 years of racing in this Lotus 79. As always, featured onboard cameras to run our way through, and with a full onboard lap, we don't even have to fly our way on through them. Starting up first, though, it is David Rodriguez in that Nezumi Graphics LC machine. He rides with Arena. A new streaming experience for esports is coming. Get involved and make a difference on arena.tv. Rodrigo Munoz carries the Majors Garage with him, your #1 source for iRacing setups. Visit majorsgarage.com. Chris Fowler, hoping not to be cursed today, carries Next Level Racing over his shoulder. Take your racing to the next level. Visit nextlevelracing.com. And his teammate Michael O'Brien carries with him HyperX. Whatever you play, however you play, HyperX knows we're all gamers, and HyperX is always ready to game. So 37 laps on the board, Andrew, and a slightly intriguing pit stop equation for many of the drivers to try and pick their way on through.
Yes, it really is here, Arjuna. And this is going to be very interesting in terms of who wants to lead this race, because what we've been told is that a normal stint here is going to be about 16 to 17 laps, but there is the possibility in the draft to fuel save to 18 and crucially maybe up to 19 laps. And in a 37 lap race, if my math is correct, you want to do an 18 lap stint and you want to do a 19 lap stint to make it on one stop. So we are right on the cusp of potentially making it a one-stop race, but if you don't save enough fuel, it's going to be a two-stop race. Even if it's a splash and dash, that's going to be a big time penalty because you have to, as we say, go all the way down pit road at 40 miles an hour, and it's well over 20-25 seconds lost just simply on pit lane alone. So it's going to be very interesting to see who does the fuel saving and who just goes all out here and tries to lead this race.
And the interesting thing is, the bigger the field, the bigger the spread, the more stretched out we're going to see the field get heading into pit stop cycles, Andrew. We're going to have no guarantee of where drivers will filter out in traffic, clean air, and those sort of gambles become so much more important.
Absolutely. There's so much involved in the strategy of this race, and it's going to be so interesting to see how it all shakes out. And we are just a couple of corners away from the beginning of watching that happen, Arjuna.
So we'll take a quick look at your weather conditions as well as we head our way into that penultimate corner. Got the Jackie Stewart stand off to the driver's right. Pretty good conditions, all things considered. Mostly cloudy. Hopefully the tire's not going to be put through too much load. Of course, we did see some drivers taking tires last time at Homestead, Miami. See Bi-Supply tires, how well they get on here in upstate New York. But ready to rumble. Competition, commitment, excitement. This is Lionheart. We're ready to go for the first road course race of the 2023 Lionheart Retro Series. It's Marius Valiokas that gets us racing for the Gomez Sim Industries Grand Prix at the Glen, presented by Butt Kicker, and immediately down into the 90, he leads us cleanly through. Razmas tries to fire it up the inside of Phil Krause, who concedes because he's worried about Sean Campbell trying to follow through. Too wide a little bit further back, scrambling over the crest of the hill. 100 feet of elevation already climbed, but now the straight blast out through, ignoring the bus stop chicane off to driver's right and instead heading over the bump and directly down the hill into the outer loop. Campbell now past Krause as well, who's already down to fourth position, but a nice tidy start, Andrew, through 39 machines.
An incredibly tidy start, Arjuna. This is not what we were expecting if by what we saw in the practice was to be anyway taken as gospel, but it was not, because we have somehow made it through three-quarters of a lap with 39 machines around Watkins Glen. I don't think I've seen a start this clean ever at Watkins Glen with this many cars on track. So credit to the Lionheart boys for what they have done here so far. And unfortunately, it looks like Phil Krause is the big loser on that start, but Sean Campbell is the big winner. He has got himself up three positions, in fact, all the way up to second place now. And
so WMP Racing run 1 and 2, but with fuel mileage expected to be so important, is Phil Krause just biding his time? We'll have to wait and see. Out of the final corner, though, and at the end of lap number 1, already half a second the lead between first and second spots as they filter their way across the line. You see some side-by-side moments outside of your top 10, though, as they work their way in towards the 90 once again. This is a look at Chris Hill, who tried to look down the inside of Kite Bomber's back. With such a tidy start, Andrew, does it mean for drivers further back who maybe, like Sam Ryman, thought, I don't want to qualify, I want to stay out of trouble, that now they're thinking, right, I've got to get down to business, and that's why we're seeing Andrew Wood, for example, getting past the Candyman.
It certainly instills a sense of urgency into some of these drivers who elected to go farther back, anticipating a little bit of carnage that we'd seen so many times in practice. But now that the start has gone as well as it has, they are stuck back in the back of the field, and they have to find a way quickly through this field. They have to use that draft, but it's so difficult in these cars, especially back in the pack where everyone has a draft. You really have to find your way through some of these tighter corners, especially in this boot section. You're going to have to find your way past these drivers that maybe you qualified behind strategically. Now you really have to get your speed out and get through, as we saw a little bit of a twitch there, Arjuna.
Well, that's the margin for error, or the lack thereof, that you have here at Watkins Glen with grass everywhere. That was a half-send attempted, I think, by Jim Herrick in the white and blue Lotus 79. as they work their way into the latter stages of the boot. That was a little bit of an aggressive look-see a little bit further up, though, as we check in with your race leaders once again. Draft train, that's a word that some of these drivers became uncomfortably familiar with last year, Andrew. Seems to be playing out at least somewhat similarly at the start right now.
Yes, it does, and I expect that at least for a little while here, that's going to be sort of the theme of the day, especially as some of these drivers are going to work that fuel strategy that we were mentioning right off the top. You don't want to necessarily get too far out in front. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Valiokis and Campbell, those teammates. Will they maybe play some team games here, have Valiokis lead for a few laps, have Campbell lead for a few laps, just see what comes of that fuel strategy. Meanwhile, we've got a little bit of a gaggle here, almost 3 wide into the outer loop.
They decided better of it, which I'm glad to see, on lap 3 of 37. But this is Chris Hill, Richie Hearn, behind them Dan Zegers and George Sandman, who's trying to work his way back up a couple of positions after dropping down on your initial race start. You got the Juncos Hollinger Racing Esports car that's going to tag the back of the Sandman. Not much that he could really do there, but Bruno Miranda, the front end of that car, worse for the wear.
Yeah, and that was just one of those unfortunate incidents where you sort of had...
Sorry, Andrew, because it got even worse. We've got a track blocker. Now, is this going to bring out the caution? Because it was right around at this point last year that we saw it. It was on lap 1, not lap 3. But for back-to-back years, Andrew, slow things down. The caution waves here in the Lionheart Retro Series.
And this is exactly what can happen in a situation where you have this long train. Is all it takes is one mistake, and then suddenly it compounds. People stack up in reaction to what happened. It looked like it initially started, obviously, with that incident that we saw with George Sandman and the Juncos Hollinger machine, but then on the exit of that of the toe of the boot, it just compounded, and there were several cars involved, and we're going to have to get a replay to see exactly what happened on that exit there.
My days. Now, the one thing that we know is that this probably means, even with the full pace lap that we had, we're going to get 2 laps under caution, at least given what we saw last year. I think we're guaranteed a one-stop race now.
You would think so, but at the same time, like, if you're Valiokis and Campbell now, you really don't want to be in the lead of this race, because I think that if you're Kraus or Rasmus, you can comfortably make this a one-stop race. If you're Valiokis, I don't think that you want to lead this race, because you're looking at a 16 or 17 lap stint, and even if you go out this stint to 18 or 19, you're still looking at a 17 lap stint for the next one. In clean air. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with these two teammates out front.
That is actually a very valid point that I had not fully considered, and so we'll have to now wait and see exactly what happened to bring out this caution, and if we are going to see anything change as a result. Maybe some drivers will come in if you are closer to the back of the pack. Here we go, though. That's the initial look, of course, at what happened into that corner, but now we'll check out Chris Lanini, and I think it also involved Jim Herrick in that number 40. Oh! Lanini got tagged, rather Herrick got tagged, there's a car up and over, and then there's more cars that end up on their lids, literally.
Yeah, so it happened right in front of Lanini there, and yeah, it was just a complete track blockage, so I completely support that call to do a full course caution there, because that track was completely blocked, and there were about 6 or 7 cars, George Anzaldo being one of them, who got collected in that melee there. I'm still not sure who got into the back of Herrick, but oh, look at Anzaldo. He just had nowhere to go there.
And that's on, again, his 100th career start in this retro series, so quick tot up of the damage bill, if you will. I can confirm down on pit lanes, Darapoli, Jenkins, Forsyth, as well as Herrick. Munoz has already been in, gotten some damage repairs, and headed back out. But I'm sure there's more that got tussled in that. Ryman, Gallas, Anzaldo, Hassert, plenty of drivers, I think, are going to exit off to the right-hand side and work their way down this pit lane. It's Bomber's back the first, though, and he was clear, and so I wonder if this is a call from him to try and make his life in the next portion of this race, Andrew, just a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great call from anyone who is basically from Bomber's back, who was in about 13th position on back. I definitely support this call for them to come down pit lane. I don't see why anyone would have stayed out here, because now you basically have ensured that you are going to have one stop to go, and you can go not just fuel save, but flat out from here on both stints. So I think it's definitely a good move here. No tires, obviously, for any of the drivers who came down pit lane. It's all going to be about that fuel, and I think this is a really good strategy call from anyone who was about 15th on back. But really, if you're in that top 15, you're basically locked into this strategy of staying out, because you don't want to have anyone who is way far back in the pit lane or back in the queue in front of you. So it is what it is for everyone in the top 15, but I really support this call from Bomber's back to come down pit lane.
So there is one thing that concerns me a bit for him. He does have to get past Hugo Gallus and Sam Ryman, who have a bit of damage on their cars. We're looking rearwards from Christopher, by the way, who was great to see him return to this Lionheart Retro Series back at Homestead. Was looking pretty feisty as well. On a road course, maybe not where we traditionally expect to see Stouffer running well, Andrew. Good to see him still doing relatively well. He qualified 28th. Given that we had 39 cars again, not bad.
Yeah, of course, a former member of our Power Slide
Oh no, you mentioned that. Sorry, we had to be biased against him. I forgot.
Yes. So I was just pointing out the bias that you had inherently for him here, but no, Christopher, he's a veteran of the Lionheart series, of course, and he did have the year away last year, basically, but it's good to see him back in these cars. And as you mentioned, he's more of an oval specialist than anything, but he does hold his own on the road courses, and his key is really to stay clean and stay with the strategy, and if he can do that, then he can really have a good race here. But his key will definitely be avoiding any of the carnage that happens.
Lights off on the pace car, so we're going back racing this time by. So again, 2 laps. Pretty familiar trend from what we saw last year. So WMP Racing 1 and 2. I'm pretty sure Kraus elected immediately that he was going to do the fuel saving game. So in your mind, he's now comfortable to get to the end, sitting back and forth. When does he start to get aggressive to try and work his way to the front?
I don't think you'll see Kraus really work his way to the front until the second stint of this race. I think that he's got to maximize this stint as much as possible and then see what happens, see where Valiokis and Campbell come in after this caution here.
Well, so far the script for 2023, pretty similar to 2022. Valiokis and Paul, caution early doors. What happens after this? Hopefully not a repeat, at least if you're on the crew of that 23 machine. Into turn number 1 once again they go. Single file at the front. It's Fowler, Guyon, Rodriguez tussling over 9th, 10th, and 11th as they scramble their way up the hill once more. Of course, the fact that we started single file in some ways is going to check the field up a little bit more, and that's why Sean Campbell already under pressure. Rasmus Kraus trying to find a way on past.
Yeah, Kraus is full of draft here behind the two WMP Motorsports teams, but it looks like that it is Mike Rasmus who got the better of him, so it looks like Kraus is just content to ride in that 4th or 5th position here for now, just as I suspected that he would be. He's looking a little bit racier than I would have expected, but at the same time, he's really contained himself well here on this start. And meanwhile, it is sort of single-filed out throughout the field, but there are these battles that are coming on because this is the best time, Arjuna, to really make a move happen is on these first few laps of this stint.
Has been an issue on this restart, so we'll check it out. Working back through the pack, it's Scotty Johnson. Oh, and he disconnects initially and then gets collected as he reappears into the world.
And you can't blame whoever hit him there because they just didn't know where Scotty Johnson was, and it looked like there was an incident that happened while he was in sort of the ether of the iRacing world there. He got some phantom contact,
Absolutely.
and that put him right in front of whoever it was that hit him.
So, one more green flag lap now in the books, and it's still WM Prix Racing 1 and 2. You said you don't want to lead. What would you do if you are Valiokas, though?
So if I'm Valiokas and Campbell, I'd be coordinating here. I would be swapping every probably 4 or 5 laps, just to try and extend the stint for both drivers as long as possible. There's got to be some form of cooperation here between the teammates if they're gonna both make it to the end of the race. So that's the basically only strategy that I would have, because if you're WMP, you really like where you are from the fact that you're leading the race and you're controlling the pace, but at the same time, you have to be cognizant of the fuel at all times throughout the rest of this race.
I did see a note, by the way, from Josh Chin in our YouTube chat earlier on. Yes, the wireframe is enabled on the Juncos Hollinger esports car of Bruno Miranda, excuse me. Of course it was Josh Chin that was going to point that out. I'll leave that one at that. Let's not forget that in terms of drivers that have led laps, only 7 have done so in 6 previous years. Valiokas, Taylor, O'Brien, and Rasmus amongst them. It's not a track which we traditionally have associated with passing. Strategy is usually where you have to work your way towards the front, but having said that, Andrew, does it flip around in that second half? Are we expecting people to be released a little bit more?
I think it will, but it really, again, depends on just what kind of fuel economy that they make, because it was 2 laps of caution that we had, but it was only 2 laps, so you really had to do a very good job of fuel saving, and you have to continue to do a good job of fuel saving on this first stint. You definitely want to make this stint 19 laps here, and if you can get to the 19 laps, maybe even 20 if you're further back in this draft line, that's really where it's going to come into play here.
On board with Michael O'Brien, who did grab his first victory in his Lionheart Retro Series career last year. It took a couple of cracks at it before it eventually came, but of course it was on a road course, and it's not a surprise to see him in contention once more. The further back you are, the more fuel you're able to save. I don't always think, though, it means that you're in a better position, because there's a limit to how much fuel you really do need to save at the end of the day, Andrew. And so if you're stuck behind someone like Phil Krause, Mike Rasmus is looking rapid as well, Sean Campbell looking quick, what's the mindset the further back in line you are, even though O'Brien, Graf, Fowler, these are all drivers that still have a visual on your race leader?
So here's the thing, Arjuna, is that with this car and with the radial tires that we have, the last lap of the stint with the lightest fuel and those older tires that have really been worked in, that's going to be the fastest stint. So if you're 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th in line, what you're trying to do is save as much fuel as possible, go 1 lap further than your competition, and make that lap the fastest lap that you can possibly make. As long as you're within that 1.5 second margin, you have the ability to leapfrog 2, 3, 4 positions up in that line. That's where you make up your time. So I think that really, looking at it, Krause, O'Brien, Sirois, Taylor, they're really in a very, very good position here as long as they keep Valiokas and Campbell in their sights and within that 1.5, 2 second margin.
I absolutely agree, and that's why we brought it up. We look at your team logos on that left-hand side. Look at the number of Graphics LC Nozumi cars inside of that top 10 as well. Now, they're all divvied up, maximum 3 drivers per team. A little bit difficult for you to see on that left side. We'll try and talk you through that. But meanwhile, 2 rookies duking it out. Fontaine, Hill, side by side, with Hill trying to work his unacceptable Racing 31 now around the outside as they rework their way out of the boot section and onto the classic configuration of Watkins Glen. You got to be so careful as the track almost falls away from you, and somehow Christopher Hill holds on to his car. It's Fontaine that has to slot back into line.
Yes, and look at how much time that those two have lost just dicing between themselves. They've lost almost a full second to the driver in front. I believe that's Alex Guillon. And now they're under pressure. That's Daniel Zagris, one of the drivers, I believe, who stopped on that last round of pit stops. Zagers really needs to get back on the draft of the likes of Guyon and Rodriguez, stay near that top 10 if he wants that strategy to work out for him.
Look at Gabe Wood, though, charging with no drafting assistance, though, and he'll stall out on the inside. Up front, though, why is Phil Kraus and Mike Razmas dropping down the timing order? Defending champion, race winner 2 weeks ago. They've tangled through the outer loop. Kraus down outside to the edges of the top 10. Razmas with a damaged car potentially blocks the path of Gabe Wood, who now has to fight side by side with Fontaine. Big drama up towards the front.
Razmas has a little bit of damage on that left side of his wing. What has happened between the car of Phil Kraus, the number 4 of Phil Kraus, and the number 1 of Mike Razmas? It's definitely been some calamity. It looks like both of them have been able to gather themselves up, but Razmas all the way down to 13th, Kraus all the way down in 10th place. This is disastrous for both of their hopes.
I'll grab a look at the replay in a moment's time. Look at the left side of the screen. Kraus down 8, Razmas down 10. Goes to show the speed that we saw out of that number 1 car in the early stages. Here's a look at what happened, though, on board with Mike Razmas. Oh, he gets hit from behind, doesn't he?
Yeah, but it was a checkup there. There was a lot of braking there from the 2 WMP Motorsports cars, and Kraus was following along right in the wheel tracks of Sean Campbell, and it just looks like both of them were fuel saving here. They were checking up at the entrance to the outer loop, and really Rasmus had nowhere to go there. Or sorry, Kraus had nowhere to go and right into the back of Rasmus.
One final look from up above. I think this is an incident worthy of a couple of different looks. As Phil Kraus, not someone that we traditionally see getting involved in silly, clumsy incidents like this, which I think is probably the best way to describe it. I mean, if I'm race control, I genuinely don't know how I'd actually look at that one.
Yeah, to me, that's got to be an avoidable contact on Phil Kraus.
The problem is the track falls away from you, right? Because there's the bump and it all just falls away.
At the same time, Arjuna, it was a clean contact to the back of the driver in front of him, and Rasmus had the worst of the contact, so it's really difficult to escape the fact that Kraus needed to stay off the car that's in front of him, because it was straight up the back of Rasmus there, and Rasmus did nothing wrong.
This is the danger, though, ultimately, of the fuel-saving games that we sometimes see, and the caution may be exacerbating that for the leaders. David Rodriguez, I think that's going to be his day done and dusted, and indeed takes the car immediately back to pit lane and says, nope, that's not heading back out there.
Yeah, and that's something that everyone has done at Watkins Glen, is you just overestimate how fast you can go through that toe. You really want to push it for all that it's worth. You have the banking that can try and get you through it, but at the same time, if you overestimate it just a little bit, it just pushes right to the outside, and that's what happened to David Rodriguez there.
We are starting to see a bit of a separation build. Top 6 split by just under a second. Tyler Graff just about holding on with them. And then Razmas, Kraus, Guyon, Hill, all just on the second little bubbles that we've got right now. As Matt Taylor climbs his way past David Sewer up into the 4th position. On lap 12, we're only about 7 laps away from the one-stop pit stop window opening. Probably 5 laps away from those who have decided that they're not going to try and do the one-stop to try and come on in.
Yeah, so the real question is, where does Valiokis and Campbell fall in that window there, and where does O'Brien and Taylor fall in the window? Will they be able to go 1 or 2 laps further compared to the WMP Motorsports cars that are controlling the pace up front? But you mentioned that gap that's forming right now. Guyon and Kraus really need to get their stuff sorted out here and find a way to get back up to that leading draft that Tyler Graff has sort of capped on the end. Oh, as Kraus comes into pit lane this time by, so he's
got a black flag.
He's got the black flag.
Is some sort of a penalty, and so Phil Kraus, you said avoidable contact. Live race control agrees.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think that's the fairest thing, because Kraus, at the end of the day, if you make contact with the back of someone who's checking up, really, you have to be anticipating that. You have to understand where you are on the track, and it's unfortunate for Kraus. He's got to drive through, and it's not the end of his race necessarily, but it really is the end of his hopes for a good top 5 finish here.
Michael O'Brien got past Sean Campbell through the outer loop pretty easily. Campbell, for a moment, it seemed like was going to try and fight it around the outside. O'Brien didn't give him really much of a choice, and now the WM Prix Racing 1 and 2 has been broken up. O'Brien has been hanging back far enough that he has likely well and truly saved enough fuel. I wonder, though, if he actually wants to lead this race, Andrew, because he'll just be making Valiokas' job of saving fuel a little bit easier. He could sit in second, put the pressure on, and force him to save fuel while going fast.
Yes, I was going to say, this is exactly where O'Brien wants to be. Not necessarily in first place, but in second place, as you say, forcing Valiokas to keep on using fuel, keep on trying to make him, trying to force him into that two-stop strategy that we were talking about earlier. But at the same time, it looks like O'Brien is confident not just in his fuel strategy for the one-stop race. In draft, he looks confident in the clean air as well. He's going right around Valiokas, and Valiokas is not putting up a fight. I think Valiokas realizes that he needs that draft just as much as O'Brien doesn't need it at this point. So it's really interesting watching these games being played at the front. O'Brien takes the race lead, and I think it's a little bit of a strategic move from the WMP teammates there.
And so O'Brien, back-to-back laps, grabs the lead, and now let's see if he can break away. We know how strong the draft can be on lap 14 of 37. Still Tyler Graf holding strong, so 7 cars deep. Guyon Razmas fallen off completely at this point in time. Phil Kraus emerges in 26th position, so we're guaranteed to get a new winner, at least this season. Question will be, who will it be at the very front? I am also just going to say, do not discount Mike Razmas from jumping back into the equation here, because he's just gotten past Guyon and is only 4 seconds off of these cars.
Yeah, the trick for Rasmus is he's got to use up a lot of fuel to get himself back up towards the front, and he's got to find a way to get back onto the draft of Tyler Graf, Chris Fowler, and David Sirwa. If he can do that without using too much fuel here, and without spoiling his one-stop strategy, I definitely think that Rasmus will be a factor come the end of this race. He's got the speed and he's got the talent to do it. He just needs to find a way to get that, to bridge that gap that you see between that 7th and 8th position right now. But right now at the front, Michael O'Brien is really doing a good job controlling the pace, and I think that he feels like he's really good on fuel. The question is, when he sees the fuel number coming around after this first full lap of leading, will he still feel as confident as he was to take that lead?
Saw that Valiokas was just saving fuel on that run out of into the outer loop, not really putting too much pressure onto the back. Mike Razmas was not the fastest car on track last time by, but that was partially just because he had to make the pass on the likes of Guyon, but is maybe the fastest car on the track. Track is progress for sure at RaceSpot.tv/timing. Do you want to come in? You mentioned that the car is the fastest on the last lap, but knowing the situation we're in where everyone is basically running at the leader's pace here, Andrew, if you're Sean Campbell as a hypothetical, we know the speed that he's got, why wouldn't you come in a lap or two early?
Well, it depends on how you define a lap or two early, because you have to make it, if you're Sean Campbell, you have to make it to lap 19. If you're Valiokas, you have to make it to lap 19, because it is that extreme fuel save that we were talking about earlier on. You have to find a way to use that caution and make it to that lap 19. The trick is, will you be able to make it to lap 20? Because I feel like Taylor or Sirwa or Fowler, they can easily make that lap 20 at this point. It's the Valiokas-Campbell-O'Brien equation in this that turns it from a 17-lap stint to an 18-lap stint on that final final run to the flag. So that's really what it comes down to for me. I don't think if you're Campbell that you want to come down a lap or two early, because that means that you're basically committing to a 2-stop race here.
The safety car again takes us out of the danger window and how much fuel you have to save. For those that had saved enough fuel before, done the fuel saving initially, it made their life a little bit easier. You can see Taylor starting to be dropped. 3 cars maybe now, a bit of a choo-choo train away. It's a treacherous pit entry at the best of times here at Watkins Glen, because it's directly on the racing line. See that yellow line? That's where you're meant to technically stay inside of. No one actually does that, Andrew.
No, and if you do, you're basically asking to be rear-ended through that turn 11 there. What you're really trying to do is find a way to get yourself slowed down as you're coming off that corner. You're basically letting off just enough that you can get yourself slowed down in time to make that 40-mile-an-hour speed limit down pit lane. But it's a very, very tight pit entry there, and it has caught out, as we've mentioned before, a number of drivers, Marius Valiokas being one of them.
Hopefully no pit lane shenanigans this time. He's not going to lead every lap heading into the pit stop cycle, although maybe he didn't last time either, now that I think about it. 12 months ago in sim racing terms is a long, long time ago. You were still building the setups 12 months ago, Andrew, although your setup from last year has time traveled to this year.
It has just a little bit, but you're right. It's been a long time, and there's been a lot of growth, but with a lot of the drivers here over the course of this season and the last season of the Lionheart Retro Series, and a part of that, I think, is just them. A lot of these drivers have come to grips with these new retro tires that we talked about. It was a big story last year. It's not as big a story this year, as all of these drivers have really gotten used to the new tires and the new way that these cars drive. But part of that we saw at the beginning of last year, as you mentioned, everything was so new last year. Now everyone's a little bit more settled in, and if we're being honest, everyone's just locked into the draft right now in this top 7 group that we have here. But Mike Rasmus is still hanging on about that 6 seconds back from this leading group.
And more crucially, he's got it down by about a second to Tyler Graff in terms of the gap he's got until he gets drafting range. Now, Michael O'Brien has already conceded the lead of this race. Here comes Campbell to get into the draft of his teammate. O'Brien, look at that commitment over the bump, and it's a big bump through the outer loop on entry. O'Brien will still hold that inside line as they descend down on through that entry into the boot complex. At this point, surely you'd think they're gonna get single filed, but no, heading on to the first lap of the expected pit stop window, Valiokas has maybe saved enough fuel. He's got the lead once again.
Now, is this a preview of what we'll see come that final lap of this race? Valiokas and O'Brien. Look at O'Brien, the commitment, trying to go around the outside there. He goes way to the outside, skips over the curb, and now he's on the inside to turn 9, coming back onto the main part of Watkins Glen here. What a defense there from Michael O'Brien on Marius Valiokas, and wow, they get very close there. And now I think Sean Campbell is going to use that to slip on by his teammate.
Yeah, I think Valiokas got a bit spooked there, and they all survive. Unfortunately, that's a 40 racewear car, that has definitely not survived. And add another one to our flip counter, unfortunately, for Chris Reagan, who is known for his spectacularness, but not, I think, intending that necessarily.
Yeah, that was one of those cases where one incident sort of breeds another incident. I think that there was just a little bit of distraction with the 22 car that had gotten sideways through that corner. Meanwhile, we've got a heck of a battle going on here at the top of the field. O'Brien is still defending now versus Sean Campbell, the rookie. And Marius Valiokas, his teammate, is dropped all the way down to 3rd here. But what it has done, Arjuna, is that gap they had got over the likes of Matt Taylor.
And now Chris Hill, another one. Sorry, Andrew. They're dropping like flies here. Consecutive laps, cars going up and over Chris Reagan the previous lap, Chris Hill the next lap.
Yeah, that was a big incident from Chris Hill. It looked like that was in the outer loop again, so it looks like calamity in that outer loop is the recipe of the day here. So the action is coming fast and furious right before the pit stops. Meanwhile, we have made it to lap 19 here. Who is coming down pit lane this time by? Who's extending it out one more lap?
O'Brien's in for sure, and the rest behind him ducking off to the right, although Matt Taylor extends, and at least Chris Fowler will follow him for one additional lap. Can they convert the rocket ship that the Lotus 79 is on low fuel to an overcut? We're about to find out. Quick look at the replay, though, as pit stop's going to work their way on through. That's the initial incident for Samuel Fontaine. Chris Reagan was fighting in and amongst himself. There's Andrew Wood on his inside in that Team Talent machine, and he just gets squeezed and checked up there. And fortunately for those following on through, they didn't get collected.
Yeah, it was very fortunate that was basically a one car incident there. But I will say that Matt Taylor, Chris Fowler, and Richie Hearn, they are in the catbird seat right now, Arjuna. They are exactly where they wanted to be, especially Taylor and Fowler being a part of that lead draft. They can go as fast as they can on this lap, and they potentially not only can leapfrog a couple of positions here with the low tire or low fuel and fresh and older tires that we talked about, but they only will have 17 laps to go on this final stint. That is more than doable. The 18 lap stint that some of these other drivers will have to do is a little bit longer. And we can see what's happened to some of these drivers that came out of pit lane. The top five, or the top three have really strung out compared to Graf and Sirwa and Rasmus.
Michael O'Brien wins the race off of pit lane, and it was by considerable margin, but of course with the draft it was always going to be tucked back in. Campbell and Valiokas, the teammates able to follow them through, but like you were talking about, here are the drivers that now we've got to watch for. It's about 5 seconds pit stop time for those traditionally that came in on the previous cycle, 9 seconds for those that just came in the last lap. We'll wait for Richie Hearn and company in a few more laps to come on in, but Andrew, Matt Taylor into his box.
Yeah, so Taylor and Fowler just patiently waiting, watching, and you notice that neither of them are going up on the jacks. This is all just fuel here. Fowler gets in front of Taylor on that round of stops here. Who is going to be coming out of pit lane? And surprisingly, it looked like O'Brien and Campbell and Value, because they're well clear of these drivers, and they're actually right all the way back to Mike Rasmus now.
So on pit exit, it's a battle immediately for the likes of Fowler, as now too wide, almost a couple rows deep. Plenty of graphics LC machines now just squabbling amongst each other, which is great to watch, but at some point they'll realize they've lost 3 seconds up to the gaggle that we'll still wait to see. I don't think Richie Hearn, Luke Daniels, George Sandman, and Ricky Hardin have done enough to be able to get into the battle for the lead, which is now just down to 3. They've done enough likely to be able to insert themselves into the equation for the top 10, Andrew, which, again, given the timing of the caution, was what they were hoping for by gambling and coming on in.
Yeah, absolutely. Richie Hearn, obviously the lead driver of those drivers who came down pit lane the last time, or on that last caution. Oh, as O'Brien makes a mistake there, and Campbell is taking the lead of the race here.
First mistake that we've seen out of any of these three, to be fair, so far today. And it comes at a time where O'Brien's lost his teammates. He's the sole standing survivor in the quest for the battle for the lead. They may have Ricky Hardin to deal with in a lap or two's time if he doesn't have to come down pit lane, which he hopefully will, because he's on to lap 17 of his run as well. But with O'Brien showing us that he's made a mistake, you can tell how tense he's probably feeling right now.
Yeah, he's absolutely feeling a little bit isolated right here, as Valiokas is now trying to use that draft to get by not only O'Brien, but maybe Campbell as well here. He really got a good run through the S's, and he's going to take the lead of this race. So Valiokas right back to the front. Keep in mind that all three of these drivers, they do have to save here, Arjuna. So it could be a little bit strategic here that O'Brien is going to stand behind these two WMP Motorsports teammates, at least for the time being. and take full use of the draft here.
Don't think it's going to be too big of a save, though, all things considered. So I think
they came in at the end of lap 19, so that's going to be
of saving.
An 18-lap stint is still it's not an insignificant save. It will require some saving.
But given what we've already seen, I don't think I'm necessarily too worried. Here, by the way, at the end of lap 17, which does include the couple of, maybe the lap or so under caution that Richie Hurd would have done. Onto pit lane, Luke Daniels, George Sandman going to follow on in as well. So lead going to cycle back around. And now expected that the majority of the field will have finished their final pit stops of the race. Still waiting for Joe Hassert, Drew White, and Dustin Wardlow to come on in and do that further back in the field. And they're going to be the ones cycling on through. Like I mentioned, though, Richie Hearn, as he filters out towards the blend line. 8th position, going to be dropped into a fight with Dan Zagers. It's worked a treat for him, +9 so far.
Yeah, this was exactly what Richie Hearn was hoping for, and this has put him in a nice open area of the track where he doesn't have any traffic, doesn't have anyone to deal with. So if he can get his tires up to temp again, and that should put him in a nice top 10 position. So all Richie Hearn really needs to do is convert that into a solid result here. Meanwhile, we're watching a small battle here between Dan Zagers and Alex Guyon, just slightly behind Richie Hearn.
It's been an interesting battle so far here in upstate New York. Our first road course race of the 2023 Lionheart Retro Series. 3 still left standing, though, with plenty of the race still left to go. Don't go anywhere on RaceSpotTV. We'll be right back with the run to the checkered flag. Welcome back to RaceSpotTV and to Watkins Glen for the Gomez Sim Industries Grand Prix at the Glen, presented by Butt Kicker. It's been a fascinating race so far, and lap traffic is rearing its head at the very front of the field, where WMP Racing runs 1 and 2 is the Kiwi Michael O'Brien that's trying to break their stranglehold at the front of the field. Hello everyone and welcome along. Arjuna Kankipati alongside with Andrew Kinsella. With already more than 24 laps in the books, about 13 still left to play, 3 cars running at the front, and then a train behind them that's seen the charging Mike Razmas Andrew build himself back up into potential podium contention.
It is podium contention, but he's got to find a way to move this pack of cars, including Fowler. Oh, as we see a little bit of a spin there, that was Tyler Graff.
It was Chris Fowler, in his the Zumi Graphics LC Madworks Motorsports car. They've given us the most ridiculous team name. We've got to make sure we stutter every time we say it, especially because it's just processing. You know how it has to load from a hard drive? He's not the only incident that we've had, though, in the recent stages. You've been trying to figure out what some of our corner names should be here at Watkins Glen. I'll show you an incident with Andrew Wood. This through the final corner. It looks fine until it's not.
Yeah, and of course Montreal has the wall of champions, and my contention is that given the number of incidents that happen at turn 11 at Watkins Glen, there has to be a name for that wall as well. Joe Hassert, meanwhile, comes out of turn 1, hits the bump on the exit, and spears straight into that inside wall. And then we have Chris Fowler. He just gets in a little bit too hot. You can see he was always a little bit loose through that turn 8 of the heel of the boot there. And that's lost him about 5 seconds to that group. And it's also broken up that group quite significantly, allowed Mike Rasmussen to take that 4th position. Mike Rasmussen, who we mentioned, is getting closer and closer to getting potentially a podium finish here again. Also has the fastest lap of the race, Arjuna.
Did you see that avoidance by Matt Taylor as well? Amazing job. Just see the rear end from the 20 step out and to just slowly shuffle his way up to the side. Fortunately, track limit's quite lenient there. Rasmus being 4th gives him 3.5 seconds and a slingshot, a clean shot at working towards the front of the field, where coming to take 11 laps to go, it's still Valiukas, Campbell and O'Brien. And to your point, we had this discussion right before we went to break. You're going to have a little bit of fuel saving to keep in mind as well, so we will track that, of course, over the course on our run to the checkered flag. Let's talk about our arena driver profile, though, because I think it's fitting that today, of all days, that we talk about our defending champion. 47 starts, of which 41 have been converted into top 10. Just think about that. An incredible run. 8 wins along the way, 2 pole positions. He fights his way to the front. He doesn't always just end up and start there. Started at the Indianapolis Road Course back in Season 4. Didn't have to wait long to get his first victory. And what a season it was last year, Andrew, for him to grab the crown.
Absolutely. And that first win kind of surprises you, doesn't it, Arjuna? Because you would think of Mike Rasmussen, he is so strong on those road courses. But he got his first win on that oval, and that's really been the story of Mike Rasmussen. He's taken to this Lionheart Retro Series and the challenges that both the road courses and the ovals present so well. And as you say, that consistency that he has with those top 10 finishes, 41 out of 47 races in the top 10. There's just no other way to put it. Whether you look at Mike Rasmussen or you look at Adam Blocker or Phil Krause or any of these other Lionheart champions, the number one thing that they have is that they have the consistency, and Mike Rasmussen ranks right up there with those other drivers that I mentioned.
I think his title defense starting off quite well. He's got some lap traffic between him and the top 3. If they do decide to fight in these next 10 laps, he'll very much be a contender. Phil Krause, after his drive-through penalty, by the way, down in 17th position. His recovery chances, of course, somewhat limited, but he's doing the best to stymie the bleeding. And in a long 22-round championship, at least it's good to know that Phil Krause can have a season where he doesn't just finish on the podium.
It is good to know that he is a fallible human being and not just simply an alien automaton that racks up win after win after win and podium after podium. Can you tell that I was one of the drivers who was racing him last year in that American Open Wheel Series that we had?
Wasn't fair last year. I thought Adam Blocker had a year in 2021 where he was averaging, what was it, a top 5? Oh, it didn't finish outside of the top 5, and then Phil came and did that same thing but with top 3s. It was not fair. Christopher in a fun fight with George Sandman. Behind them, Bomber's back and Daniel squabbling as well, but we did mention Christopher, or you mentioned Christopher, very capable of hanging on the road courses. He's battling George Sandman, someone that we know is plenty strong on a road course. Chris has gained 15 positions since the start of this one.
Yeah, and this is really what Stouffer is good at, is when he can stay out of trouble in the beginning of the race, he can really eat those positions by just staying out of trouble, staying consistent. And George Sandman, we saw it earlier on with that incident with the Homecoast Hollinger racing driver there. He just was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he is definitely on the recovery drive. Not necessarily where we are accustomed to seeing Sandman outside of the top 10. He is certainly shown that he is very strong in these Retro Series cars, but just not able to really recover the same way that we've been accustomed to here today.
Can you get that Jaws music out, by the way, Andrew? Because let's take a look at our lap chart for Mike Rasmas in his number one machine. I was trying to make sure. Yes, that is the number one machine. Last time by, a 1:33.097, his fastest lap of the race. And I say his because he's the only driver to have cracked the 132s. A 1:32.981. He's within a tenth of a second of his fastest lap of the race. 2.2 seconds back from the draft of O'Brien.
And this is all that Rasmus can do at this point, is he's got to push as hard as he possibly can, try to make up all the time that he's lost to that leading trio. And if he can find a way onto that leading trio, he can do whatever fuel saving he has to do at that point, but he has to be in the draft sooner rather than later here.
Got probably, I think, 4 laps before at that point, you would surely think O'Brien's going to set himself a little bit looser. Last time by for Rasmus was only a 33.463, which is still 2/10 clear of most of the rest of the field. Pretty remarkable consistency, all things considered. Check back in with Dan Zagers, Alex Guyon, Gabe Wood, Val and Whaler as they all duck their way down in towards turn number 1. We mentioned this earlier, but the racing conditions here pretty optimal, Andrew. The clouds have allowed the track temperature to drop. Pretty good grip for the tires, all things considered.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not much more that you can ask for from the conditions. Maybe a little bit windy for some of these drivers here, particularly the high commitment level that you have to have through these corners. But as we watch the battle for 9th here between Zagers and Guyon, they get so close through the outer loop there. As we ride on board here with Gabe Wood, watching the Zagers and Guyon battle here into the chute through the entrance to the boot. They're really going at each other, Arjuna.
Zagers trying to block the line there, and Guyon half-hearted, jink back to the inside, but never really on at the end of the day. While these cars continue to squabble, Phil Krause is actually having to fight a little bit. He's not getting it all his own way. Sam Fontaine is keeping him honest. That's Gabe Wood, Alex Guyon. Big tussle between them. Gabe Wood gets off the worst. Guyon maybe actually will have damaged suspension, but we'll grab a look at the replay there. I think Guyon got into the side of Wood.
As soon as we were remarking on that battle, the commentator's curse is in full effect there.
And now I've just taken Chris Stouffer with us in the commentator's curse.
Oh no, Chris Stouffer, he was having such a good race there, and he made a mistake through that turn 9 area there, and it has put him all the way back. And all that good work that he has done, it's all for naught.
So we'll check out very quickly what happened. Guyon loses the rear end by himself, and then Gabe Wood, nowhere really to go. Gets very much the worst of it.
I think Guyon was just a little bit too deep on the brakes there, and he locked up the brakes trying to avoid Daniel Zagers there, and then, as you say, just an innocent victim there. And then here we have what's happened to Chris Stouffer. He comes up on that 08 of Guyon.
It's
Guyon
a
spins, but yeah, Stouffer got in too deep, carried too much speed through the corner, and he spun in sympathy with Guyon.
Guyon's had to head back down to pit lane. Stouffer at least has stayed out. Guyon, of course, the damage taken in the contact with Wood, compromising him significantly. Coming around, though, to take what will be 6 laps to go. It's still Valiokas that leads from O'Brien and Campbell. There's Rasmas. There's Taylor as well. 5 cars split by 4.5 seconds in the closing stages of the race.
This race is far from over here. Will Valiokis be able to make it on fuel? He's been leading throughout the course of this stint. It takes so much discipline to be able to lead while still saving fuel, and that's exactly what that 23 car is going to have to do, is he's got to save just enough fuel to make it across the line. Meanwhile, O'Brien is going to do everything that he possibly can to put pressure on that 23 to use as much fuel as possible and potentially just run out just that little bit before he comes across that line. So it's all down to strategy and it's all down to skill at this point.
If it's going to finish as is, I do believe that will match last year's numbers. 22 cars finishing on the lead lap. That's not going to mean that 22 cars will finish. And immediately, I will take the blame for that commentator's curse. I will not take the blame for Phil Kraus having any sort of crashes, though, because Phil Kraus is his own kettle of fish. And so Phil Kraus crashing out of the race cannot be blamed on a certain commentator in the commentary booth. Let's check this one out. It's going to be the curb. It's not going to be the curb.
Not. Oh, my.
That is Gabe Wood.
That is entirely on Gabe Wood there. That was just a terrible entry from pit lane. He hooked hard left coming out of pit lane
as well.
Yeah, and Phil Kraus just a completely innocent victim there. And I expect that there's going to be some post-race punishment there for Gabe Wood coming out of pit lane. Meanwhile, this is Dustin Wardlow coming out of turn 9, and you can see it's just so treacherous as the track falls away. Wardlow loses the back end, and that's going to be day done for Dustin Wardlow as well.
And so now as Valiokis and O'Brien separate themselves from Sean Campbell, here comes Mike Razmas to leapfrog himself back into the podium spot, and still in contention not just for third, but with 4 laps at the line. If Campbell doesn't put up too much of a fight, could Razmas be a contender for victory still?
I think Razmas is still definitely in the conversation here. The trick is, I think Campbell is realizing that he cannot keep up the pace of Valiokis and O'Brien and still make his fuel number. So will Razmas be able to find a way around that 26 car of Sean Campbell in enough time to put himself in contact with Valiokis and O'Brien?
Sounds like Gabe Wood had a broken rear wheel and was struggling to get it pointed in the right direction, spooling up the rear tires potentially. Unfortunate for Phil Kraus to turtle shell himself his way across the track, but see what race control has to say about that one. So we will not finish with 22 on the lead lap. We are down to 20 left now on the lead lap. Barney watches on, getting ready to wave that white flag. We haven't seen too many moves into the outer loop at the front of the field, Andrew. Do you want to be leading come white flag, or do you want to be sitting in second?
I think that I want to be in second. I want to be Michael O'Brien in choosing which lane that I want, because we've seen O'Brien, not only was he able to overtake people on the inside, but he was also able to overtake people on the outside into that outer loop, as we see them overtaking some slower traffic here. So O'Brien is really good at not just taking the racing line and taking that, but he's able to find those sort of excess lines, those outside lines through these corners, and finding a way to make them work. So I don't know necessarily that I would want to be second, but if I were Michael O'Brien, I would want to be second.
I see what you mean. I feel like I would want to be first, personally, just because I feel like if I protect the inside, I think I can do enough. I would not want to be on the outside. That is a guarantee. If I'm going to pick, I think I don't want to be on the outside risking being shoved out wide. Fortunately, I'm not in that position. Campbell not allowing Razmas by easily. Now that Razmas is having to deal with dirty air, his speed is unraveling a little bit as well. It's starting to settle in a little bit more. And now with 3 laps left to run, how worried would you be if you are Michael O'Brien that you're not closing up as aggressively as you were 3 laps ago?
Yeah, it's definitely a concern, but like, if I'm O'Brien, he's still within 0.4 of a second of Valiokis. That's definitely something that you can draft up here, as you see him just like saving fuel. All this is about is saving fuel, trying to make that fuel number. And I'm still suspicious of how Valiokis is able to lead this race for so long and still make the fuel number. I'm still not convinced that he can quite make it to the end here, Arjuna.
You think they're still close?
Well, you could definitely hear on that onboard that O'Brien is still saving fuel. He could have closed up even further to Valiokis there on that straightaway, but he was lifting out of the gas there for sure.
One thing that I don't think we have talked about is the fact that O'Brien, maybe you did, Andrew, and I completely missed it, 9 seconds stationary in the box for O'Brien. Compare that to 10 seconds for Valiokis. Now that 1 second of fuel may have helped him to maybe be a little bit closer, to have leapfrog Campbell and Valiokis in the race off of pit lane. However, has it hurt him in terms